Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you all for coming. Today's seminar is one that I'm really excited about. We introduce the speaker and then we'll go from there. So our speaker today is Professor Virgil Gligor from Carnegie Mellon. Professor at Carnegie Mellon, where he directed the CyLab, University's Institute for Security and Privacy, between 2008 and 2015. Over the past 5 decades, his research has ranged from access control mechanism, penetration analysis, denial of service, protection to cryptographic protocols, and applied cryptography. He was an associate editor of several ACM and IEEE journals, and the editor-in-chief of IEEE Transactions, Dependable and Secure Computing. He received the 2006 National Information System Security Award, jointly given by NIST and NSA. The 2011 Outstanding Innovation Award of ACM, SIGSAC, and the 2013 Technical Achievement Award of IEEE Computer Society. He was inducted into the National Cybersecurity Hall of Fame in 2019. So join me in welcoming Dependable.
Thank you, Moses. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. So my outline is pretty simple. I'll talk about the axioms of security, insecurity, and usable security. Just to set the stage for Greenbox, which is the platform that I would like to talk about today. We'll go to the security usability summary, the status of Greenbox, and then conclude with this discussion and questions. What you see here is that the word axioms is in quotes. Axioms has to hold forever, but forever in technology is 15 years from now or until I retire. So I would retire earlier than the 15 years deadline. However, in 2010, when these axioms were proposed, 15 years was a reasonable deadline. So let's start with the first one. First one says that there will always be rapid innovation in commodity software, and this will always lead to low assurance commodity systems. Low assurance here means systems that have security flaws. So what they say is that in commodity systems will always have security flaws. Now, why is that reasonable? Right? Because you may think that the Googles and the Microsoft and the Amazons of the world will wipe out all the security flaws from their software, which is commodity software. Well, 3 reasons. So first of all, there is an approximate zero cost of entry in the software industry. There is an approximately zero regulation, and there is approximately zero liability in software systems. Now, what this does is something very interesting. These 3 things together cause a huge amount of innovation in software for commodity systems. In fact, there is more innovation in commodity software than in the history of humanity combined. So faster innovation. So this is great. Okay. But unfortunately, this leads to insecure systems, buggy systems. The second one is that there will always be large software components, which I occasionally call giants, in commodity software, whose properties are not understood by most users. The properties that we are talking about here are obviously security properties. Okay, now, why is that? Well, that's the case because we really want to achieve high productivity, and to achieve high productivity in software development for commodity systems means that we are going to reuse other people's software and add components. However, we never subtract components from the other people's software because we don't want to break compatibility. we want existing software that we borrow to run as was before we added our components. So essentially, we keep adding software to existing components, improve functionality, do a lot better, but again, we grow the size dramatically. A quick example was around 2010, the Android operating system was about 400,000 lines of code, and 10 years later, it was like 10 million lines of code. So people kept adding and modifying. So that's the reason for the second axiom. The third axiom says that there will always be bugs, features, and operator errors that will lead to security vulnerabilities, and there will always be adversaries that take advantage of them. So bugs and features are from the first two axioms. What about operator errors? Well, in terms of operator errors, we know that there is human error, and social engineering would sometimes win, and sometimes win in the large scale. People install malware on our systems, we click on the wrong link, we gave the wrong answer, we took the wrong PDF, and lo and behold, we get malware on our system. So even if you solve all the security problems in the world, we actually make mistakes and break our own security system by importing malware. Okay, so with these three axioms in mind, what we conclude is something which is absolutely fundamental in defense everywhere, namely, that an adversary has an asymmetric advantage over the defender. In other words, the adversary has to find one flaw in our systems to break it, whereas we have to defend everyone. So that's asymmetric advantage in defense. In our case here, the remote adversary has an asymmetric advantage over the local defender. So the local defender is the owner of the laptop or the system under consideration. And the remote adversary always has an advantage. So somehow we want to fix this. Now, the fact that the adversary has a fundamental advantage or asymmetric advantage over the defender led to what's called the presumed breach mindset. And this, the presumed breach mindset said that you have to always operate your system consciously with the assumption that the adversary has already penetrated your system. Okay, that's what NSA told people in 2021 when they were advertising what is called the zero trust model produced by NIST. So the idea is that at any time you operate a system, you have to assume that the adversary has already breached you. That's due to the asymmetric advantage that the adversary has. All right, so by definition, this presumed breach idea, which originated not with NSA, but they popularized it, implies that they have to recover from these breaches. If we are always going to be breached, eventually we have to recover. So that's a fundamental implication that presumed breach requires recovery. So what the government proposed here, in particularly the NIST people, not the security but the networking people, produced this zero trust architecture in 2020, which is designed to limit the damage of a breach. So what does it mean? What does this zero trust mean? You probably read about it all over the place. People thought that zero trust was going to solve all our problems. Well, as you see, it doesn't. So zero trust architecture is enforce the least privilege principle without breaking any application. So least privilege principle is that you shrink the privileges an application has to the minimum so that the applications still work and will always work, but they have the fewest permissions to run. Then you continuously verify and monitor access patterns. Sometimes they call this never trust, always verify. Okay. And that's why they call this zero trust. In fact, if you repeat steps 1 and 2 continuously, you shrink the trust to a minimum, which is actually a single device trust. So you trust a single device, not an entire network for it. Okay, so if you do this, it doesn't mean at all that you're not going to be penetrated. You are, but you limit the damage. The next thing that you notice is that you need an early detection of breaches, right? You're going to be breached. You want to find out as soon as possible to be able to recover. If you detect breaches as soon as possible as a recovery, the cost is going to be much lower than if the adversary spreads around and you don't detect the adversary attack. Now, this actually requires nowadays the use of machine learning tools and artificial intelligence. Why machine learning? Well, you have to look at audit trails, log trails of applications, and detect through searching the audit patterns that there was a breach. And then through your entire network, you have to combine the signals that come from the machine learning system and say, yes, there is a breach, signal it. This is something that humans cannot do manually very easily. So you have to use these automated tools. Turns out that this is a very, very good idea in practice. The third reason is that the third problem, if you presume that you've been breached, you have to recover. And if you recover, you have to go on and patch the vulnerability, which caused the breach. Otherwise, it's going to happen again. The breach is going to occur again. And so preventing breach recurrence under the presumed breach mindset means that you have to patch vulnerabilities. So all these things lead us to the notion of a recovery cost, which means applying zero trust, early detection, AI and ML tools, and patching vulnerabilities. All this have a cost. We want to minimize this. We want to keep it as low as possible. Very reasonable. Okay, what else do we know? We know that by definition, what else do we know? We know that this presumed breach mindset has a first failure. There's some problem that this presumed breach approach does not solve. What is that? So the problem is that the zero trust architecture and the use of AI and ML tools, as we outlined them here, do decrease the cost of a recovery from a breach, but they do not minimize that cost. So let's see the cost reduction. So these are real data from IBM surveys. One of the things you see here, that the average cost of a breach has gone up from 2.24 million in 21 to 4.24 million to 4.8 million over these years. You find this in the IBM data breach cost reports. Okay. Now, what IBM reported in this technical studies and the surveys was that the use of mature zero trust architectures also ended up increasing the recovery cost. Of course, zero trust architecture is good because it reduces the cost somehow, but the cost also increases. And what was even better, and you can see here, is the use of AI and ML extensively. What happened is, in the surveys which they did, show that if you use this, your recovery from breaches will cost a lot less than the average cost, including less than zero trust. So you should be focusing here, and that's one of the reasons why they didn't even bother by 23 and 24 to report what zero trust is. Because what you see here, these numbers are very telling that, yeah, you are going to decrease the cost. So the cost between zero trust and average cost was 0.96 million, 0.99 million. The cost difference between these two were much higher. In other words, you save the one more. So this column here is much better than the average cost. Costs a lot less. But what you also see is that the effectiveness of this tools and these methods has actually decreased somehow and then increased a little bit. In other words, it's not uniformly good. So, for example, the difference between the use of AI and ML, this low number, and the average cost went from 1.3 million to 1.34 to 1.3, and then to 0.5. In other words, the effectiveness of the tools on the last column has been decreasing. You didn't say that much, right? But then all of a sudden it went down. What that means is that whatever you do here, the cost is not going to be uniformly better in time. better difference, but the effectiveness is not going to be uniformly good in time. Okay, so the question is, this doesn't tell us that the cost is not minimized. Just tells us that the cost decreased, but they're not very effective. Can we tell that these are not the minimums? Not from this data. So essentially what we notice then is something else. The minimization comes from a very different source. What source? Cyber security insurance. In other words, if you are able to purchase cybersecurity insurance, you are going to decrease the cost of recovery to a minimum. Why? Because the cost of recovery is spread along a large population of insured enterprises. So not everybody is going to be rich at the same time. So you pay a premium every year, and then that premium used to pay for the recovery of people who get rich. So essentially, that is a sure thing that I have a strong implication here, that minimizes things. Although this is intuitive, there is no proof there, it's just that economics shows that insurance minimizes costs. Okay, so we know that insurance minimizes cost, and now we go to a second problem of the presumed breach mindset that the NSA people have been advocating. So second thing. So what do we know? We also know that if we leave known unpatched vulnerabilities in our systems, there will be breach recurrence. We are going to get hit twice, 3 times, 4 times. So you actually have to patch vulnerabilities. We also know that we cannot purchase cyber insurance, cyber security insurance, not cyber security insurance, if we leave unpatched, known unpatched vulnerabilities, such as unpatched CVEs or KVs. What's a CVE? It's a common vulnerability and exposure. This is published by the US government in the NIST and MITRE databases and shows all the flaws which are known with potential scenarios for those flaws. KEVs are known exploited vulnerabilities. So out of the CVEs, the government decided, I believe by 2021, to publish the CVEs that have been exploited in practice, for which we have code, exploitation code that the adversary used, and for which we have patches. You don't get the KV to be published if you don't have a patch. Vulnerability was exploited, but you already have a patch. So essentially, the government is trying to make it easy for you to patch systems. And they give you these priorities in terms of patching times. 1 week for vulnerabilities which are exploited in practice, for ransomware, for example. 3 weeks, 6 months. They give you various deadlines. Okay, it turns out that the reason why this kind of makes sense is that 97% of breaches caused in general are unpatched CVs. Now, it turns out, unfortunately, that over 60% of the companies which have recently been surveyed by BitSight, which is a company that looks at KVs and sees it, the KVs which are published by government affect enterprises. So over 60% of these companies which are exposed with KVs do not patch or miss the deadlines. 60% miss the deadlines, and a significant number of them do not patch. In other words, they exceed the 6 months deadline, say by 1 year, 2 years. Okay, so the failure 2 of the presumed breach mindset is that known vulnerabilities are not patched in a timely manner, if at all. What that tells you, if you have unpatched vulnerability, it tells you that the cost of recovery cannot be minimized, regardless of the use of artificial intelligence and ML and zero trust architectures. Because all those approaches, zero trust, AI, and ML, accept the idea that there are breaches in the system. They try to detect them fast. Okay, so what do the data show us? The data show us that 66% of the 634 enterprises surveyed by Resilient in 2002, have more than 100,000 unpatched vulnerabilities. This is a huge number. It really made the news. 100,000 unpatched vulnerabilities, when in fact there are maybe on the NIST database or MITRE database, there are only about 240,000 vulnerabilities left. Plus, okay, another 40,000 this year. But they are fewer than 300,000, and 100,000 are unpatched for 2/3 of this enterprise. So yes.
Are all of these vulnerabilities weighted equally?
No, there is no weighting of the vulnerabilities. In fact, there may be some which are irrelevant. But what these companies have also said is that they know how to patch only half of them. So it's still a huge number. Let's call that 50,000 vulnerabilities, which are not, they don't know how to patch it. I have a whole different presentation on that, so I can answer a lot of questions after this talk. All right, so why do CVs persist? Well, we do know that they persist. So what do you know? First vulnerability that appeared in the internet published was fingered by Robert Taff and Morris in 1988. And it turns out that that vulnerability, if you search this database from NIST, lasted for about 20 years. 20 years. After 20 years persistence, which did not have this vulnerability patched. What about Virgil D? This we discovered my group discovered it in 1992, and we published it then. Discovered it earlier, but we published it. And the last instance was discovered by us using Google Bard. It showed that it lasted until 2017. So we're talking about 25 years. And STAT-D, which was published by the government in 1996, actually by FCI, Carnegie Mellon, was given by Andrew Grosser of San Diego, and that lasted for about 8 years. So we're talking about vulnerabilities lasting for years, and you can actually show that other types of vulnerabilities, if you search with Google Bard, whatever generative AI tool that you have that allows you to search that vulnerability database, you should use to figure out the longevity of the CVs. Okay, so it turns out that CVs not only persist unfixed, CVs persist, but worse yet, they grow to a very fast rate. So the rate at which they grew in 2023 was between 25,000 and 28.8 thousand, depending upon who you ask. NIST and MITRE tell you, well, they're about 25,000. And now the latest number, which came in January, was that we have 40,000 new vulnerabilities that appeared in 2023. 40,000. That's 38% over this number. So what the conclusion from this is that all this presumed breach approach from the second vulnerability really is not working. Yeah, I presume that I'm breached, but what do I do? If I'm an enterprise, there is a slew of things that I could do, but I don't know how to prioritize. I don't know how much money it's going to cost me. It's hard to do. I can't even hire companies to do it for me because it's too expensive. So the presumed breach approach may have worked 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but certainly it's not going to do us much good. That's why you'll no longer hear about the magic of zero trust architectures. Okay, so what about usable security? What do you do? So these axioms are also axioms in quotes, presented in 2010. Remember, 15 years or until I retire. And 15 years are going to be in March. I'm not going to retire in March. So anyway, so what do the users always need? So one thing they need, they really need a high degree of security, none of these presumed breaches, for few applications. So what statistics show is that most people have fewer than 12 applications per domain. So it turns out that these domains are high-value domains. which are, and I don't mean internet domains, I mean in the general sense of an area. So in the financial domain, we have very high value targets for attack. We don't want to have our pension funds, our banking, we don't want to deal with those because sometimes we don't get made whole by banks' insurance. Healthcare, again, high value. Defense and intelligence, high value. We don't want breaches in those areas, and we've had quite a few recently. And the Navy will tell you that the Chinese breach their systems and the Russians breach their systems. And we don't want breaches of embedded systems in some cyber physical systems that might turn off your lights. And there are multi-user games where there is high-value games and so robotics and so on. Now, in each one of those domains, you don't have much more than 12 applications that you really need to harden, that no adversary can reach. Okay? Particularly, no remote adversary in my case. So what else do people want? Users want feasible recourse. I know that I will be breached. I was told that I will be breached. What's my feasible recourse? Well, one possibility, which I'm going to address today, is this notion of isolation of a part of the system where the adversary cannot get to. So the compromised software, which is my system here, cannot touch my isolated component, and we want to be able to switch to my isolated component in a verifiable way, and I want to have local access to my isolated component, which the remote adversary can't. So I isolate, I could verifiably switch, and I know that I can access from my keyboard and my mouse my isolated system, which the adversary cannot. That's the general idea. So the last one is that we really want this to be very simple. In other words, otherwise users don't use it. The switch to the isolated component and the trusted path from my keyboard and my mouse and video displays should not really cause any difficulty for the user. Certainly it's not more than a login, right? Because then I might have to purchase another machine and later on. All right, so what I want to do, I want to have a transition from this presumed breach to what's called the prevention first. In other words, I want to prevent breaches in some way, not all of them, of course, right? So that's why it's prevention first. Prevention first and then presumed breach, but not the other way around. Okay, so what do you know so far? Well, we are trying to figure out how to do this. How to prevent any remote adversary from breaching our high-value applications. So what we know is that zero trust architecture and traditional AI and ML decrease the cost of recovery, which is great, but they do not minimize cost, and more importantly, they do not address vulnerability backlogs. You'll still have vulnerabilities. Secondly, what we know is that the rational adversaries, which are enterprises, business enterprises, do want to minimize recovery, and they know how to do that. They want to purchase cyber security insurance, but in order to do that, they have to patch the known vulnerabilities, which means that there are going to be unknown vulnerabilities left. So even if you patch the known vulnerability, what happens to the zero-day attacks, which all this software has, right? So you have some of this. So we actually, for prevention first, we have to do more than patch vulnerabilities. This area of patching vulnerabilities is a huge area. If you get into it, it makes a lot of money. Saving companies money in patching makes a lot of money for you, right? So I'm not going to address that today, but that's one of my areas of interest, okay? So one thing that I want to address today is an area that prevents first breaches in that isolated space. And that's formal verification of selected modules. And we showed that there is no escape from this. 2023, I'll give you a reference if you want. So that there is nothing you can do to prevent first, other than this very small set of items of tasks, selecting modules, prove their penetration resistance, prove it formally, and basically show that there is no vulnerability of these pieces of software. They have to be very small, of course, because otherwise we can't do that for 10, 50 million lines of code. Even AI will not be able to do it, right? Our code bases are too high, too large, too long. The possibility of errors is too high. Okay, so this is where Greenbox, this platform that we described today, comes in. There are many ways to do this, but one of them is simply this. My laptop split it into two areas. One is in which I use an unmodified operating system, set of applications that I always use. They will always run. I don't touch them. Maybe I add to them, but I don't really cause any backward incompatibility. So that's one thing. That's called the red. Then I'm going to install underneath a green area. And this green area, unfortunately, cannot survive without the red. I'll argue that that's the case, so you have to have both. Then I have to show how to do the user verifiable switch. I log into my computer, I click on a button on the browser, and I switch. And that I have to be able to verify using my eyes and my brain and my fingers. So that has to be human verifiable, the switch, in a way in which that remote adversary in Novosibirsk, Russia, cannot fool me. Okay? So user verifiable switch and the trusted fact. In other words, when I switch, I have to switch my input and output devices. So that now I know that the devices are in green and they are not in red. They can no longer be used by malware, right? So essentially, that's the approach that I'm going to take to defeat any remote adversary. Why? Because what I'll show you that these things here, verifiable switch, trusted facts, and of course composition, give me local power over my machine that my remote adversary doesn't have. So I'm reversing the asymmetry for this very small area of the system. So there is no longer an asymmetric advantage that the adversary has over the in the green area. So if you want to reverse that, and forget about the presumed breach, which is always going to be a red, and can be compromised. If you want to reverse that, you have to go to green and you have to do a verifiable switch. There is no other way that I could think of. Maybe you will find some in the future. But so far, nothing has worked. And then finally, of course, we have to do similar things for the server. Yes.
So are those red and green, are they applications or the operating system?
Everything from, you'll see it's everything from firmware up. It's a lot of, it's a huge separation. So if you separate from ground up, your verifiable switch is not going to be highly trivial. So let's go to it. Let's see that. Okay, so by the way, the necessity for this, the real necessity for this was shown in this paper in 2023. In other words, this is not a fantasy. This paper argues why the rational adversary has to do this. And of course, patch as much as possible. But that's how you separate the red from green. Okay, so let's look at Greenbox. So basically, the first thing you do in Greenbox, you have to install it. So Greenbox is a micro hypervisor which doesn't virtualize anything. It just separates address spaces and allows a user from red to invoke the micro hypervisor to install the client, which of course you choose from the untrusted system. But the micro hypervisor verifies that the client is the one we expect, which is its specs, because there's configuration control. In other words, this micro hypervisor only accepts invocation of few clients of few applications. None of this dynamic linking and dynamic downloading and weird configurations, none of that. This has a list of code, hashes of those code. The request comes, you go to the disk, you get the code, you hash it. Is it accepted? Fine. Not accepted, rejected. Okay, so the other thing that you notice here is that the micro hypervisor implements an input-output kernel for very few devices. In particular, we start with the devices in the trusted path, very few devices. And we have copies of the device drivers. So like copies of my driver, my keyboard driver, copies of my video display driver, and copies of my mouse driver. A breach copies if you want. Okay, very, very few, three, for example. Okay. So then what the microhypervisor does, it loads the untrusted operating system. This is a commercial version. Nothing unchanged. With lots of applications, including browsers and whatever else is here. Device drivers, these are the drivers for the same devices, keyboard, display, mouse that I have, but they have red copies. So you could have access to these devices and not have access to devices themselves, as we'll see in a minute. Okay, so what happens next is that the question is why and how should this green box platform that I have here, why should it be composed with an untrusted operating system? In other words, why do I need this? Why not develop just the green idea and come up with a totally new system? Well, it turns out that that's practically impossible because there is a lot of value in red. Remember, that's what the innovation is. That's a rapid innovation, if you recall, axiom number 1 of its security. That's where it happens. You know, I want to get rid of that. If I don't really need security, that's what I want to play in here, not in the green box. I only want to switch to the green box when I really need security for that less than a dozen applications per domain. All right, so essentially the answer is, in order to be small, formally verified, this small number of modules, in order to keep their configuration control, no patches. And so in order to keep that, what I have to do is to use the services of the penetrated system, but verify the responses. I don't have a file system in green. I don't have a directory system. I don't have network protocols. I don't have backup services and so on. All those are untrusted. So what do? I use authenticated encryption, you know what that is, to encrypt my data in applications here, client applications that I use. I have permanent storage here, right? Sealed storage. Use those data, dump them into a file system here. And when I retrieve them automatically, the cryptographic routines tell me if there's any modification of this encrypted data. That's what authentication encryption. It was very high probability. So I do authenticated encryption, and then I can, the decryptor verifies automatically, by the definition of authenticated encryption, whether there's any problem. Therefore, I don't have to trust this because I can verify the valid return. It's very high probability. So this was proposed in 1979 on a paper that I co-authored while I was at the University of Mellon. All right, so clearly we have to compose things. This is composition of red and green. I can't get rid of it. I can try, and I'll show you later, there are ways to get rid of some of it, but I still need composition. For example, notice that this firmware here is unfortunately shared between red and green. So what happens is, even if I isolate red from green, red can access and modify the firmware. So if I share the firmware, I'm stuck. So what I have to do something to fix that. Because what the adversary can do is to do all those bad things, capture credentials in red when I log in, which of course I would have to do, because in order to start any computation, the user has to log in. And where does the user log in? In red. There is no login in green. Not that's necessary. Okay. So I log in there. And once I'm logged in there, I'm done, because what the adversary can do is to do these bad things. capture credentials and confidential data, capture keystrokes, or inject fake keystrokes, install malware, corrupt client processes. The only thing that the adversary cannot do that is to access the Greenbox platform. It cannot even, the adversary assassinator cannot even click on the browser and try to switch. I'll tell you in a minute why that's the case. All right, so the problem is that the adversary in red has exactly the same permissions in red as a normal user, as a legitimate user. That's where its advantage of a legitimate user comes from, but not in green. All right, so now the question is, what do you do about this firmware which can be compromised? All right, so now, so what does a user do? Or what does the adversary do? So essentially, the user can switch to green from red with one click on the browser. It's a browser button which is switched to this. While this is still possible, adversaries on our compromised system. So switch. So essentially, there is a switch which does a couple of things. One is that it activates a client verifiably. It will not be activated by the microhypervisor. It is not on its approved list, which it verifies. Right? So no random configuration, no dynamic configuration. Only what's approved here on the list here will appear as a client. Okay, that's good. That's good. But how do I know? How do I know that this switch is just a fake that actually returns to right, which paints a green picture for me? How do you know that the switch was done? I can't tell because red can paint anything on my screen. Remember, this is what I see with my own two eyes. So somehow I have to be able to verify that this is the case. So the verification is in 3 steps. One is conditional. What I see on the screen is some sort of a secret message or a secret picture. And that would be great, except that that's good only if the green platform exists. So it doesn't solve my problem. It makes it, gives me some good hint that it exists. But then what I have to do, I have to verify that the green box is. And how do I do that? Well, we know how to do that. We've done for a number of years. We do what's called a local attestation. So we use the TPM, and the TPM has a certificate, and the certificate is installed in my external phone or external device. What happens? My external device sends a nonce to the TPM computes a hash functions using as well as the nonce, does a signature on what it finds, and sends me the signature back to my phone, and my phone verifies that the signature is correct with the public key of the certificate which is installed in my phone. So I test that everything from the hypervisor up, but the client, if I want, is there. So because the platform before the green box is there, I can actually trust what appears on the screen. That message, maybe a rose or a dog or my favorite cat and so on. Okay, so now I know that whatever I chose to the green box interface to be placed is there. So I have more confidence. But guess what? If the adversary changes the firmware, the green box is irrelevant. The green box understands. So essentially what I have to do then is something more complicated. And that is to run a local unconditional root of trust establishment. This basically says that there is a method, and don't have to worry about it. There is a method by which, with an external verifier, I can actually tell, in principle, that the correct firmware is there. This is not easy because it requires access to the hardware. Can my grandmother do that? Well, she was gone, but she couldn't even if she was alive. Sure, alive. Right? No. Can 90-year-old people do that? Maybe not. If their economy decline. So what I have to do, I don't do this too often. I can take it to my Apple shop or to my Microsoft shop and they do it for me to verify that this formula is correct. Now, if I don't like that, I can only verify that once. And what I do, I actually separate on my system the green box hardware from the red box hardware. They share the hardware, but I separate everything from the firmware on that side from the firmware on this side. They are still interconnected, but the red firmware cannot access the green firmware if I separate them. So I can, it's going to cost me a little more, but I can do that. And then I only have to do the attestation, the root of trust attestation for the firmware once. By the way, this is a fundamental discovery which I used to be very proud of, because it's the only verification in computer science which is unconditional, meaning there is no bound on the adversary power. You can have a supercomputer, a quantum computer behind you, you can't fool the verification. There is no secret, and there is no trusted module, something that's trusted that you can assume, that you need to assume. Even the verifier itself has very little code in it. You can preload much of the nonsense and the response is expected and so on. So, if you look at one-time Path-Shannon's theorem, which is the first word was used for it to be unconditional in 1976 by Dee and Hellman, it's not unconditional under this definition because it uses secrets. And consequently, it has trusted modules. Anyway, so basically, if I do these three things, there is absolutely no way that what adversary can fool me and get into clean. Absolutely no way, guaranteed. Why? Because all this code is formally verified or tested. So there is absolutely no way for the adversary to get in there, to reach the partition. All right, so that's basically the idea. So what happens next is that the IO microkernel and the microhypervisor map some devices to the client. So it takes these devices away from other devices that you might use. Right? Network interface cards. Right? It maps them from here, it takes them away from here and moves them in this area, and I can use them. And I can even move them back if I want to use the network protocols. The mapping of these devices allow me to access local area networks and the like. Now, what happens if the adversary clicks himself in the browser? Nothing happens. Why? Because the adversary will switch to the right client and the show stops. Why? Because the adversary doesn't have access to my devices. Malware doesn't have access to my devices. The devices are gone. They are no longer in the configuration of the red operating system. Right? So remember that BIOS and VF and all this give the list of available devices. If microhypervisor takes them away and code here runs and tries to access the devices, it will get a failure. And this code stops. It turns out that there is one more requirement there, which is fairly interesting, is that the green box isolates these clients. Microhypervisor kernel isolates. Right. So, for example, if that remote adversary corrupts the server corresponding to this client application, which may be a remote server, then that server can corrupt the client, the green box. But the rest of the clients are untouched. So if he corrupted the application server, the client doesn't do much good. Either. But it cannot touch anything else. All right, so this doesn't mean, by the way, I've never argued that there is no breach of servers. The argument is if you breach the server, the application will eventually crash because the client is isolated, even if it's penetrated, can't do anything to the rest of the world. Here. Okay. So by the way, we constructed a few of these applications, in fact, a couple of applications. One is to update the firmware of your USB devices. So now you can use your USB devices even in defense, presumably, because the firmware on the USB device is actually updated by Green. Green platform, which runs a trusted hub, takes the update from the manufacturer, signed, verifies the signature, it applies it, and it works. So you don't have to say no USBs, no removable devices anymore. Because the firmware in this devices could actually, at this point, corrupt your red operating system. This was an interesting Chinese attack around 2008 where they dumped USB devices in the Pentagon parking lot. People took them, and of course, a lot of data was exfiltrated by parts of the Chinese government at that point. So since then, no more USB devices. Now we can use the USB devices because we can update the firmware ourselves. Whatever it was in there, however much malware we had, we can update it. This was a DARPA contract. And by the way, also, we had an application here, we and our partners have an application to update the keyboard firmware, which can also be explained. All right, so in summary, I have about 5 more minutes, started at 3:15. In summary, there are these features which are actually pretty interesting here. One, it was isolated feature. You can get isolation everywhere nowadays. Even secure guard extensions that Intel gave you, SGXs or TEEs, trusted execution environments, everywhere, everybody has them. So but we don't need any special hardware. Okay, that's not enough for one thing. Even if you use this special fancy hardware, that's not enough. What you have to do is to have what we call a one-click user verifiable switch, which would enable us automatically to detect on inauthentic applications, platform gearbox itself, and system firmware, as you saw. And none of it would be done remotely. Right? So we cannot do remote attestation here because it can't be done. Root of trust is argumental. We also have trusted path, which none of the systems have, which is we moved the IO human user devices into the green card. We use them for the duration of a session, say 8 hours, and we move them back. So next time we log in, we'll have the devices in red and we operate in red if we so wish, which we wish most of the time. You know, how often do you go to your high value accounts? Not very often, right? So most of the time you are in red, which is perfectly okay. It can get infected, but your high value stuff is protected. Okay. The platform is trustworthy. It removes all security bugs at the code level, which are otherwise invisible. It has no patches, no supply chain attacks. There's no supply chain in the green box platform anyway. Nobody to update anything for you. All the updates are verified. We have very little software there. Remember, under 12 applications. The configuration is strictly controlled. You can't install whatever you want in the green box, whatever application plans you want. And there is no social engineering when you are in green box and you use your user device, keyboard, mouse, video display in the green box. Nobody can fool you. Nobody can send you email and say, oh, by the way, Joe, click here. That doesn't happen. There is no login. There's only this verifiable switch, which can be as complex as a login. Can be. Okay. So secondly, the last part is usability. How usable is this stuff? So the green box has to be compatible with all operating systems and all existing applications. In other words, we don't want to break them in any way. And devices. And the green box should be easy to install, and I have a few items of interest here. I won't go over all of it, but let me assure you that they're not hard. We can have multiple options. One is pre-installed green box that we give users, enterprise-wide pre-installation, and backup and restore of the verification data, including certificates, on the external device, on the external phone. We have to have an external device. You cannot do local software attestation without an external device. You cannot do the firmware verification without an external device. Actually, I proved this in 2020, that you need an external device. You cannot do it, even if you have a network of servers that agree, that commit to an agreement, is not going to work. You need an external device. Okay, so the status, where are we? So the green box, we implemented the green box on the old hardware in a few years ago, 32-bit architectures. The micro-hypervisor was verified by other people, not by us, CyLab, and the verification paper was published in 2013. Since then, they verified it again in 2016, and we used the later verification, which they did, and we formally specified and verified the IO kernel that was published in IEEE Security and Software and Security and Privacy in 2021. The formal specification was done in Daphne, which is Rustam Leno's tool, and the implementation was done with Veil. Okay, then we had a transit to 64-bit architectures, which was not trivial, because that green line of separation is not so trivial to use. We moved from BIOS to EFI, and so there were a bunch of transitions. And then we decided to have, and we will have pretty soon, this trusted display for the user, where we can display multiple windows, multiple green windows in position. I can use multiple green applications at the same time. I would even see a red application if I want this trusted display. That paper was published already in 2015 at CCS, which is Communication and Computer Security Symposium. All right, so then we will have a new formal platform verification of micro-hypervisor and IO kernel done in Rust and Veris. Veris is a formal verification system at the core level, which is done by consortium of people, and Rust we don't know. We have not done this. That's part of the future projects. So we can complete it, a green box platform, all hardware, with verified components for this DARPA project, where we had the subcontract from a company called AIS in Rome, New York. We have an in-progress development for the new operating systems like Windows 11, Linux, the latest version, under an ONR Neptune project. I don't know if you are aware of that. And this is not a verified platform, just verifiable, which is a world of difference. Saying that you have a verifiable platform doesn't say very much, just says that it works. It doesn't say that it's really trustworthy. And then we anticipate some formally verified platform for cyber physical system robotic applications. The platform being verified in Rust and Veris. And do penetration analysis studies, not just usability studies, not just formal verification. We have to show, look, do whatever attack you want, install whatever malware you have, and you'll not be able to get in green. So now, what is our green use for in this new vision? Green and red would run on a machine which is called PLC, a programmable logic controller. The programmable logic controllers nowadays, guess what they run? They run only red. And I remember in 2013, I gave a talk at Ametec, which is in Coral Springs, where they are PLC manufacturers, and they're very happy that they moved from Windows XP to Windows 7. But it didn't dawn on them that Windows 7 would be a Swiss cheese full of holes, and now we know. And Windows 11 is full of holes, and applications are full of holes. Yet these people are running this software, legitimately so. Completely irrational. I do the same thing if I want to get my job done. Forget about the security stuff. Right? That's what they do. But now we can install this on the PLC for the energy distribution subsystem administrators. Because these are not systems which a casual user can access. And guess what? A lot of these people control their PLCs in this RT unit remotely by their phone. There is a phone interface to some of the SCADA systems and PLCs, right? You won't be able to do it. They have to log in locally. Now, locally doesn't mean that you have to go to the machine, but for local area network formed by the grid stuff. Remember that they can communicate with other grid partitions. And that's how they administer the systems. That's in the future. Yet they would use the net for other things. You have to have a file system which you dump data and you share it with your historian or your business management ones. That is still there. But the critical functions, like updating the PLC firmware, for example, which they do, updating the device interfaces, changing the device, adapting the platform on different devices, this type of devices that are attached only to it. That has to be done. So the idea of the platform is that we could use it in different environments. Very different environments here. So that's the plan for the next year and a half, maybe 2 years. So that's what we have. Okay, questions?
Thank you very much.
For the rough board or green box to operate, what is
Which slide?
oh,
Installation?
no, in general, for this side. What is the cost of implementation in firmware and then cost of running this in terms of resources and battery?
So the firmware, it's exactly the same, sorry, the firmware here. It's exactly the same firmware that you use here. Except that it cannot be compromised because I verified it. At zero cost. There are companies that actually do firmware analysis for you, like Eclipse here. Right? And they tell you there are lots of faults and you have to go through this analysis. We believe that they do a good job. We don't plan to analyze all the firmware, but we plan to verify that whatever you say works, does work. Remember, this is a condition of this verifiable switch. This is the hardest build condition, but it can be done. And now, what is the cost of developing? Well, it depends what you mean. We invested a lot of money so far.
Not in terms of developing, but in terms of sustaining it or running it, because we are using system resources to run the green box in parallel to the red region.
No. Green box runs, your red doesn't. It's the same resources.
Switches.
Yeah, it just switches the resources. Yeah, so it's no additional cost. Yeah.
So as your future work, if you want to use it for cyber physical systems, now you mentioned that it needs to be connected with some physical devices like keyboard and stuff, right? Yeah. So what if I wanted to like generally if I have a cyber physical system as a local computer on it, but I have an access to control it remotely using some SSH or something like that. I can still be able to use the data on the computer without even locally accessing it, right? So
Correct, except that you won't know that you are doing it correctly. Correct. You'll have no idea why, because red can paint the green to red, right? So we will not have any assurance. Now, it turns out that may be okay in most cases because you are not penetrated, but occasionally you have to go there and check that you have this platform still there. So remember, we cannot do remote attestation, we cannot do remote login, you cannot do remote now. If you're remote and you have this green part in your remote machine at home, and the real PLC that you want to control remotely is in downtown Tallahassee, you can do it. Why? Because your home machine, green, and the downtown Tallahassee machine, green, have a shared secret key. And they are communicated secret, even though it could go through red, right? So that can be done. But at home, you have to do this, right?
And it needs to be implemented first, by a physical hardware, that key needs to be implemented first.
Well, the key is not, doesn't have to be, you can use a standard key distribution protocol. Yeah, I'm not planning to fix that. There are some good protocols there, but it cannot be a very complicated protocol. It cannot be TLS, for example. It's too large. Because the key distribution has to be done here. So, yeah, so I can do key tree distribution, as you say, start first. I can do that. Is that? Okay. All right. All right. Any other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Comment. Thank you very much for the talk. You mentioned something that is close to my research area, which is something about rational platform or agent or service providers. I believe that there was a mention to that, right? So what if you have a less rational or someone that is making perfect decisions or it's not maximizing security?
Somebody's in cognitive decline.
Exactly,
That is a
something like
very
that.
big area.
And how does that framework
So,
can accommodate that?
well, so people didn't believe us when we told them that this is a big, very big area. Right? It wasn't my idea. About 10 years ago, Baruch Fishoff, which was one of Kahneman's students, came to me and said, look, what do you do about this old people who are in cognitive decline? How do you make sure that they operate securely? Our original response was, I have no idea. But the second response here is, there is something that they have to know. Namely, that they could click on this button after they log in. Even if after the credentials were stolen here, right? They could still log in with false credentials in a compromised system. They could click on that browser, they switch, and then they have to do this verification. They have to see, is this my red rose or my favorite cat? And then they said, oh, yeah, maybe I don't have to use my phone, but the use of the phone to do the local attestation is actually pretty simple. You don't really have to do anything. Why? Because you have the nonces on the phone, you have the certificates on the phone, which is installed by the same administrator that installed the TPM. You can replace your phone, somebody can fix your system. This is pretty easy. That's what's hard is this thing, verifying the first line. You don't want to have to do that. And mostly people don't worry too much about it. But that's a condition for people. Even people like me, I would not go every other week to Apple to do that verification. Although we did the tests for this system, and really it cannot be bypassed. I mean, we had there's a student in Korea who did that with a bunch of machines, and he showed that the timing can be very precisely measured, it cannot be bypassed even by a supercomputer. So this is so problem. So in order to deal with it for somebody who's in cognitive decline, and it's going to happen to all of us, by the way, some of us faster than others. You have to make sure that you don't have to do this frequently. You have to separate the firmware and the green box, have it on a different piece of hardware on the red. That doesn't mean that you don't run in red most of the time. It's just that it says, well, I have something which resembles a coprocessor. And you do that verification once and you are in business. Because nobody can modify that. Do that verification once. So, but that question arose, as I said, about 10 years ago, and I didn't have an answer. And we still, nobody has an answer. And at least in principle, we know that it can be solved, but we need to go to the next step. By the way, the formal verification, I was going to answer a question that you never asked. But, the formal verification of this, one client, which we plan to demonstrate, which is a VDI client, Virtual Display Interface, it's a remote desktop protocol, cost us, we computed about $4 million. At the level of 40 US dollars per line of source code, verified source code, approximate figures, of course. That's what the cost was about 3 years ago. Might go down a little bit, but it's not going to go down by a factor of 10. Between 2013 and 2023, there was almost a factor of 10. So, for example, there's a micro kernel called SCL done in Australia, which is used for many projects. Very rudimentary piece of software. Microkernel, formally verified down to the kernel. That was about $360 per line of code. You can read the review paper, post mortem paper if you want. Well, in 2021, Microsoft Research and Brian Pamlo, who's now my colleague at Carnegie Mellon, his group there verified some very sophisticated protocols down to the code level, and what they measured for about 20,000, 29,000 lines of code was like $40 per line of code verified as code. Yeah, so we might get below that. In the next few years, but not by a factor of 10. Even by a factor of 50%. 50%. So I don't think that's going to happen, but still it's doable. I mean, $4 million is a one-time cost, right? It's not the recurring cost of recovery. Remember that you have $4.28 million per average recovery from a breach. That's why I chose the $4 million threshold. And remember, you have to recover many times. Here, once, pay the price, less than a single recovery, number one. So it's not a great number. Not a great number. And in fact, what we showed in this paper, this 2023 paper, this one, what we showed is that the cost diminishes tremendously for the producer, Microsoft or Google or Word applications, as their marketing business, because they do it once and they do these components. So that's really the fundamental trade-off here. It's one-time cost of formal verification versus recurring cost of recovery from stuff that we manage. Anyway, so I think this is something that may happen. This is something that may happen. When it will happen, we don't know. Nevertheless, we can tell that our friends in foreign countries can no longer do anything. So we don't have to worry about the remote adversaries on this kind of platforms. Yeah.
So how do you guarantee the hardware though? Like, so you get a piece of hardware and plug it in your computer, right? Like, if that is, there's something embedded on it, right? Like, it's a commodity system, right? Like,
Yes.
You plug it in there.
Okay, so let me first clarify that by hardware you mean something here,
Right.
CPUs,
Yeah.
multiple cores, I/O controllers, memory. I mean, how do I know that there's no hardware Trojan? Well, so this question was asked of me and I asked myself. When I noticed that the Supermicro problem about 5 years ago, Supermicro had on one of those boards, somebody found an extra piece of hardware. And everybody said, oh, this guy who built these boards are trying to fraud us. I didn't believe a word of it. I thought it was a fake setup. Somebody wanted a setup supervisor to make their stock go down. Although supervisor stock can go down on its own, you don't need help.
Yeah.
But what was my answer? My answer is different. Yes, you could have hardware Trojan horses if you are a hardware manufacturer. But guess what? Hardware Trojan horses cannot be matched. Period. And who put in the hardware Trojan horse? See the supply chain of hardware, which is TMSC or one of those companies with your producer. Guess what? You make the pump and you do the demonstration, and their stock will go down. Whereas in software, the presumed breach approach says your software is lousy, know about it, fix it, use zero trust, do all these things, presumably, because you'll be breached. That's a big difference between hardware trojans and software trojans. What we try to do here is to solve this problem. By the way, we didn't solve the problem for a operator here who decides to be malicious and do wrong things. So we have insider attacks, which can still be there. So one of the things I can tell you that you have to have some service which does auditing of these actions and use Red to store the encrypted, authenticated encrypted logs data. So you can do something on the insider attacks, but you don't prevent the remote address. Okay, so I'm more or less done.
Let's thank, would you like one more time?
Very good. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for. Yes, I saw. I will have. It's coming with. Yeah.